Well, hello and welcome to the Opcast. This is Opline's podcast where we bring on some of our awesome military partners involved in veteran hiring and veteran engagement. And so today I am honored to be here with Mindy Jaffar, one of a good friend that I've worked with for quite some time, and great to have her on the podcast and hopefully share a little bit about what's going on at Oracle and beyond and what she's doing in the military space. So Mindy, welcome today.
Thanks, Beau. I'm really glad to be here with you.
Awesome, awesome. Well, let's start off, I guess. Really, I'd love to talk about, just kind of kick things off, about your background and kind of your military background, and really even not only your military background. What was your kind of why? What was your purpose for joining the military, or what was the impetus for kind of getting in the first place, and how that all started?
Well, that's a lot to unpack and pretty far back. Let me go there. I always say that two things saved me, God and the Navy, because my path wasn't ideal and didn't do great in high school, wasn't really focused. And about a year after graduating high school, realized there had to be something better. I could be better. Where is that? And originally went to the Air Force recruiter and he said, well, you're overweight. I said, oh, okay, I'll lose weight. Went back to him. He goes, go to the Navy recruiter. And I thought, okay, I'll go to the Navy recruiter. And, I remember not even asking any questions, just I want to join the Navy. And I made it really easy on that recruiter. I joined undesignated. I had no plans or future future in mind, except I wanted to do something better and bigger, and I wanted to be better. And it didn't seem like there was any better way to do that than join the military. I joined September of 1994. I was one of the first female companies in Great Lakes. They had moved away from Orlando and then went into the medical field. So then I became a dental assistant, was stationed in San Diego, 32nd Street. And from dental tech A school, got orders to the Marines, and I cried for 3 days and called my mom and said, I know the kind of people that like this duty station, and it's not me, and I'm not going to make it. And for 3 days, no kidding, I'm in learning x-ray and radiology. And she said, well, can you come home? And I said, no, Mom, I can't come home. Oh, there's no other option. And so I went up to Del Mar, 21 area at Camp Pendleton, and went through field medical service school. And actually, that's where I changed. That's where I grew my confidence. That's where I learned that I can do actually really hard things, because my training with the Marines was not parallel to my training with the Navy. And so then I stayed there for 3 years, worked in different areas, and that was life-changing, honestly, with the Marines. So I have a heart for Marines and definitely an alliance. So then the two ratings merged around 2004, 2005 timeframe, hospital corpsman rating and the dental tech rating. And so we became hospital corpsmen. All the dental assistants changed their names. We became hospital corpsmen. And then I went to teach at hospital corpsman A school. And so I bring that up because every tour that I did in my 20-year career was different. I never did the same thing. And I like that. Although by the time I was actually getting the hang of it, it was time to transfer. And so, I retired in 2014 as a Fleet Marine Force Hospital Corpsman Chief, and just really feel proud to be part of that, fraternity. And then the transition piece is a whole nother subject. But yes, I always say God and the Navy saved me. And that's where I learned, honestly, leadership. A Navy chief, I don't think there's anything like them. And working with a good chief really sets you up for success, challenges you. And so my career was nothing but great. It was just really wonderful. And so, I'm excited to talk about what did the transition look like, because what I thought was a good preparation actually didn't prepare me for what was next.
No, that's awesome. And a few things that come to mind for me. First off, as a Marine, I loved my corpsman, as you might appreciate. I did 2 tours at Pendleton. I don't think our time didn't overlap, but I was stationed down in Del Mar from 2000 to 2003 when I was at 15th MEU. And again, for Marines, our corpsmen are the best. And I was a CO of a recon battalion, and our corpsmen were right there next to us doing everything. So it is certainly, again, to your point, all the corpsmen are great, but the ones that come up and join the Marine Corps, it's a different world. You talked about it. It is definitely, the Blue Navy and the Green Navy are very different worlds. And again, I think, it is more intense. It's more kind of on the front lines, and you're just much more hands-on and engaged. And it's just Awesome. Again, that partnership between the Navy and the Marine Corps is just amazing. Did you have any influences that were in the Navy, or why? Again, obviously you tried to join the Air Force and they didn't wouldn't let you. So shame on them and
Yeah.
their loss, obviously. But it was just kind of a you just Navy was just the backup plan, and really no influences from your family or friends or anything on the Navy side.
There was an influence, there actually was. I was living in Bellingham, Washington, which is right on the border of Canada in the US, and working at the mall. And I met another girl working at the mall, and we made plans to hang out. And she said, okay, well, listen, my dad has a sailboat. We can actually go out into, the ocean, stay the night, and it's super cool under the stars, and that would be fun. But we need to do it quickly because I'm leaving for boot camp. And I thought, you're going to boot camp? I had an image in my mind of what someone going to the military looked like. And as a matter of fact, a recruiter called my mom when I was in high school. Again, that cold calling, trying to recruit any high schooler they could. And she laughed and said, have you seen the movie Private Benjamin? And I said, no, ma'am. And she goes, well, that's my daughter. You probably don't want to call back. And it was just never on the radar. But when I met this girl, and I cannot remember her name, I said, well, tell me more. And she said, I'm joining the Coast Guard. And I asked why. And she said, well, I'm going to learn a lot. I'll get to do some cool things. I get 30 days vacation a year. I get free training. I get free help. I mean, she's just going on and on. And I thought, that's what I want. I want that. This immediate career, this immediate stature, this immediate doing the right thing. College was just not it for me at the time. And so we did. We went out on our dad's really cool sailboat. We stayed the night. It was super fun. We came back. And that's when I told my dad, I think I want to look into joining the military. And of course, he thought, thank God. I went to the Air Force because my grandfather served in the Air Force. So it was just
Okay.
what came to mind.
Yeah.
But the Navy is just because the Air Force recruiter said go down the hallway and talk to the Navy recruiter, which, now I mean, after, well, that was, 31 years ago that I joined, but that was where I was supposed to be because what I didn't know was the customs, the traditions. I love pomp and circumstance. I just do. I love retirement ceremonies. I love change of command ceremonies. I love facing the flag. I mean, I really find a lot of joy in being part of the world's largest and best Navy. I did, but I didn't know that that's what I was getting into. And so that's how, the Navy came about. But once I joined is when I started seeing leadership. I started seeing impact. I started thinking of a team. I wasn't an athlete. There was a lot that I just wasn't introduced to and didn't have a history in. And so throughout my career, yeah, I mean there were chiefs, ended up retiring, force master chiefs and fleet master chiefs, and but those very special people that made an impact. That's better, Beau.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think it's important to talk about that too, about just the influences you have, through your career. Because we all show up and we don't know what leadership is. I mean, I came in as a second lieutenant and, I had played football in college and I was in a fraternity, but, it's not, it's just the impact and the leadership skills and the opportunity to meet amazing people that just blow you away and are willing to invest in you as a young kid. When I was 22, 21, 22 when I joined the Marine Corps, and you were 19 when you
I was
joined.
18. I turned 19 in boot camp. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just and then to have that responsibility you have at such a young age, I think is something that people I don't know take for granted, but that people maybe don't appreciate that within 3 4 years you're in charge of more people and equipment. Just like and by the time you're 20 5 years old, the leadership you've had is more than some people have in their lives. And just that opportunity is something that I think only you can only get in the military. Such a young age, be put in that situation with such a melting pot of people from such different backgrounds. I mean, that is also just something that I think is you can't replicate that anywhere else.
Bo, two things that I want to point on is the joining the military, depending on your background, you're introduced to people from different parts of the world that you've never heard of. And just even within the US, we come from different cultures and different backgrounds, and we're introduced to different food types, to different ways of living, to different ways of worshiping, to different ways of connecting, to different ways of helping. And it is all brand new to everyone. And that's what I love. And I actually was speaking at a graduation last December, and I talked about how when we join the military, whether it's officer candidate school, OIS, or boot camp for enlisted members, you are going through a transition period. They are transitioning you from everything you were. They don't care about your background. They don't care about your culture. They don't care about any of that. What they care about is how quick can you ramp to be what we need you to be, where we need you to be, and how we want you to be there. And it better happen fast. And that's right. That's the point of these entry points, boot camp and OIS and OCS. And then the flip side is then you leave the military and now you're going back into the civilian organization. There's no way to undo everything, nor do we want to undo everything, right, that we've learned and grasped and became. And we're hoping to land in a position, in an organization that at least values us enough that we don't have to unbecome everything we were. And so it's really interesting, because I spent 20 years, I retired. And so I spent my whole life, my whole adult life, serving. And it might be a little easier for your 4-year tours, but it definitely is a very interesting thing to think about. The other part is that the leadership aspect. I think that's what feels so good and scary at the same time as you're 19 or 21, 22 if you're coming out of college and joining as an officer is you're given a lot of trust and responsibility equally. And the good thing is that it empowers you to want to be better and want to serve and want to do good. But it's also like, wow, I don't think that our civilian friends understand what we're responsible of or for at such a young age. And that reminds me when I was stationed actually in San Onofre and I was at the dental clinic. I remember I'd get there in the morning, you'd have Marines sitting on the steps before the doors even opened. You open the door, they go in, and they're, what are you here for? I don't know, ma'am. I was told to come. Okay. All right. So we get them all scheduled. But I remember one day in particular, there's some chatter in the waiting area while people are waiting to go back to their rooms and get their cleaning or their filling or whatever. And all of a sudden I hear, hey, lock it up. And I look and I'm thinking, I don't think we have anyone senior here. No, it was a corporal telling all the other Marines to lock it up, be quiet, get it together. And every single one of them listened. There wasn't a side eye. There wasn't a, hey, you're not in charge of me. They just did it. And it's funny little examples, but it just shows that Eve knew and felt confident in his ability and his, positional authority, I guess, by rank to let the other Marines know, hey, we're being too loud and get it together. So it's little things like that. But then you think of wartime and what we do. And how we serve and the capacity is really hard for our civilian friends to understand.
No, no doubt about it. And a couple of things I'd say. One, I always thought it was interesting. Certainly, all cultures, all races, creeds, backgrounds, religions, in uniform, you're one team. But it was interesting. We pull into port in places, and all of a sudden, when the ship pulls in. And the groups are getting off the ship, and I'd be on shore patrol sometime. You'd see all of a sudden these guys that you only know in the Marine Corps uniform are getting off the ship. It's like you have the cowboy guys, coming off of their hats, and you have the guys that are from New York and the surfer guy. Like all these subcultures of culture are in the military. And you don't see it day to day because you're all wearing the same uniform. You're working side by side, been through the same things. That's all there. It's all under this. It's all part of the building block of the Marine Corps. And to see it like pour off the ship into ports was always just fascinating to kind of understand and appreciate the diversity of the military. And I always like that. One of the things I talk about a lot about why you should hire veterans and why you should bring veterans onto the team is it's not only diversity of background that you have in the military, it's diversity of thought too. You get exposed to so much more and see so much more than if your kid just stayed in the same hometown of the same thing. And I can go back to New Orleans and friends of mine never left town. And it's just the ability to kind of see the world and see the bigger picture is something that I think maybe people take for granted. But joining the military, it just exposes you to so much more. And it's, I think, especially if you don't know what you want to do in life. And again, to your point, whether you do 4 years or 40 years, it's just so impactful for, shaping what you become and taking on just leadership and taking on and getting perspective of what's really important. But I think you're also spot on. And, when you leave that behind, I think when you're in the military is what I would say, you don't necessarily appreciate every day I call it the give back factor you have in the military, right? Because you're serving, you're doing it, and it's your job. You don't think about how much kind of self satisfaction you get in the job where you're doing something for the greater good. But when you hang the uniform up, you don't have it anymore. there's certainly a piece of, how do you fill that void that you had, that, how do you have that camaraderie again? And you never can get it exactly the same way. It's never going to be like it was in the military. But I think that's the hard part in transition for so many folks is, how do you find that same kind of team, that same kind of family, that same kind of camaraderie that you had in the military as you transition out? And you can do it. It's just different. And I think for some people, it's hard to kind of, figure that out and, fill that void. And again, I'd love to talk about what was your transition like? I mean, how did you make your transition and kind of how did that go for you?
Well, not as planned. Oh, so I went to school while I was active duty. I got my bachelor's and a master's, and my career trajectory was really lining up along with my degree field. So that went well. But I was a single mom for 10 years, and so I had made a plan that when I retired, I'd go into a corporate position. However, I never envisioned what that position was. I just grinded at work, grinded in the military, did my job as a mom, and went to school on the weekends and at night. And I just knew this is the good path. Actually, when I was working on my bachelor's, I had a plan to apply for a commissioning medical service corps officer. And as soon as I was done with the bachelor's, they changed the requirements. You needed a master's. So then I said, fine, I'll enroll in a master's. Right as I was finishing my master's, they said, wait, it can't just be any master's. It has to be one of these. And I said, okay, I'm at 16 years. Actually, no, I was not at 16 years. Gosh, I think 12 years. I don't know. Too long that I said, I'm not starting over. Let's continue down this path. And I was selected for chief petty officer. So it all went well. But when I went to transition, I had remarried and I had another daughter a year before I retired. And so none of that was planned. And he was still active duty. And so I thought, maybe I won't go into a professional role. You know what? I'm going to go be a yoga instructor. I loved yoga. I went through yoga teacher training before I even left the Navy. I had a plan. Maybe I'll open a yoga studio. I was really just felt like the sky was the limit. And now I have a husband and he can go to work and I'm going to play around and see what I like to do. But we transferred. And it was the first time that I moved somewhere and it wasn't for me. I wasn't going into a command. I wasn't being welcomed. I didn't have a sponsor. I didn't have all the great things that come with checking into a command. And it was a really, really hard transition, not because financially we were fine. I had my husband, I had my kids, but I was actually really depressed watching him leave in uniform and I stayed home and I kind of felt like I was adding zero value. And I didn't find being at home as a mom as enjoyable as I imagined it would be. And so I went through a series of, okay, I'm going to go be a yoga instructor. I did get certified, but then I can't open a studio for moving around for my husband's career. To, you know what, maybe I'll get into photography editing because I knew someone who did it. And I broke a camera on my first scene. I thought, I'm not doing this. So I went through these series of things of let's see how creative I can be and what I can do. And so I spent actually, Beau, 7 years outside of work, 6 to 7 years. I did start to write a book and I did find a passion and I did find purpose in that. But, I was spending my own money and resources on the research and everything that I was working on. And so that was my transition. It was emotionally, it was not what I thought it would be due to some personal experience too, right? It wasn't my plan. But I also, Beau, did not set myself up for success. I thought getting degrees and having a stellar resume and hey, I did great in the military. Of course I can do great in your organization. I thought all of that would be enough. And also I retired the year that SkillBridge was launched. And so at that point, you knew of LinkedIn, you didn't know the power of LinkedIn. You went to TAP, I paid someone to do a resume. I thought maybe I could go into medical officer recruiting. I'd done that in my career. I could teach. I was a master training specialist. I taught at Coursewell. I knew that I could do a few things, but I didn't really know what it was or what I wanted to do. And I didn't spend that time planning. Again, I thought the career, the resume, and the degrees would be perfect. And so it ended up not being that. And I see that now when I talk to candidates. So I'll pause because I'm sure you might have questions.
I think your transition story is so, familiar. I mean, being in the space that we're in, we talk to so many transitioning veterans. And again, I think in some cases, they think, oh yeah, it's going to be easy. I've had all this experience. It'll naturally, somebody will find me. They'll want me. And people do want you, but it's not quite that easy, as you have pointed out, right? I mean, you have to do, the resume is fine and the skills you have in the military are fine, but it takes work, and I always say networking is such an important part, obviously, of finding a job, right? And that is the reality. I mean, you see it every day. I mean, and people get so frustrated because they apply to, 100 different jobs, they never hear back, and then they get like, oh, nobody wants me, and what's wrong? Why? And it's not personal. I mean, when you're applying to an ATS system, it's you're unlikely to get hired in most cases. Can it happen? Of course, it can happen, but it talks to I think it points out the importance of, yes, have the skills, have the resume, but the networking piece is how you end up getting a job 95% of the time, right? I always say, there's a one letter difference between networking and not working, right? Not working is what you're going to be doing if you're not networking. So get out there and network and talk to people, because I think what you find, and again, I know you do it every day, the more you talk to people, the more you get comfortable, the more you get your name in play. That's how you can get that job, whether it's with that person or the person they connect you to, or just getting out there. And it can be uncomfortable, right? You have to get uncomfortable in that and take that leap of faith, because I think we can all look and see, I mean, obviously hundreds of thousands of people get out of the military every year, and and people are successful. So you can see your friends that did, like, you can do it, but it's not, everybody's journey's a little bit different, so it's not a straight line typically to get from here to there, and you have to put yourself out there and be a little bit uncomfortable to make that leap.
I love that. Networking and not working. I've never heard of the networking and not working. That leads me into actually how I came to Oracle, and I call it indirect networking. And I want to share that because it's interesting. Sometimes I worry about sharing this story because I feel like there's a lot of luck in there. But then I think, no, there's not luck. I was building relationships naturally, not to get something. But it was almost 4 years ago that I received a call out of the blue from this retired senior chief. I did not know who he was, and he introduced himself. He said, I'm with Oracle. I didn't even know what Oracle was. I didn't have a technology background. And he said, hey, I got your resume from Derek so and so, and we're, ramping up our military recruiting. And he said you'd be a good person to talk to. And I said, I don't know him. And he goes, actually, he got your resume from Jim Whitney. And I said, of course I know Jim. He's a retired master chief. I served with him. He was with me when I went through chief and, transition. And I thought, how strange that my resume was passed between two people. And Beau, I was not a career recruiter. There was a lot of other people that could have been called. I was a medical officer recruiter for one tour. And I said, I think there's other people you'd probably want to talk to. And he said, no, I think I want to chat with you. And so we talked, and I thought, I don't know. I talked to my husband. He actually knew this guy from 10 years ago. They were stationed together. And I said, I'll think about it. I'll see. I don't know. I'm not interested in writing a book. Well, he said, just check it out, think about it. And the more I looked into Oracle, and at the time, Beau, I didn't even know companies had military career pages. So now I'm looking and going, hey, they really do like to hire veterans. Wow, they have a program. Wow, they have a whole website. I'm interested. And it was the interviews that sold me on me wanting the job. I went in as a sure, let me check it out, to by the end of my 4 interviews, I wanted the job. And I liked the interviews. They felt like conversations. I didn't feel like I was being drilled or that I was sitting the Sailor of the Year board across from a table being upright. And so I got the position, but I call it indirect networking because it was through two people that my resume was floated. But, and also that master chief, I don't talk to all the time. He stayed at my house before, we've went to ceremonies together, right? Like we have that connection, but we're not on a day-to-day basis. And I say that because we've got to think of networking outside of our little nucleus. We've got to think of networking, with the people that we served with 10 years ago. We have to think of networking with the friend of the friend, not just our nucleus. I mean, if it were that easy, we'd all be in, these family run companies, right? Like my uncle, my brother. No, you've got to talk and connect with people externally in different ways. And then of course, networking is a long subject, but I share that because here I am at Oracle, really the world's cloud provider. I mean, the work that we're doing right now across the globe is actually unbelievable. And me, I'm here. And I still think, me? How am I here? And it works, but I think we bring an expansive element to organizations. And when they do take a chance, or you have the one person who's willing to make the call, or the one person who's really willing to make the hire, even though I needed a lot of training when I came here, but I needed the new college graduates to show me how to do some things, and but I brought an element that they didn't have. And so when you have people that are willing to invest in you because what you bring, your background, your experience, your dedication, your expansive mindset, I think it pays off really well.
No, I agree 100% with all of that. And again, I think the networking piece, I definitely, I like to talk to people. And so for me, the transition process was fun in that I did just, you talked to what you were talking about, reached out to friends I hadn't talked to in a long time, friends from high school, friends from college, military friends that had gotten out, years ago that were obviously had made the jump over. What you find, I think, I think I'm sure you see this as well. When you reach out to somebody and you're not asking them about, hey, can you get me a job? You're asking them, what do you do? What is your job about? Hey, I'm getting out. I'm just talking to people. People always, 95% of the time, again, they are willing to have 30 minutes with you to talk about just what they do, what's going on. And, I remember talking to guys like in commercial real estate. I'm like, okay, you're in commercial real estate. You sell buildings. But what does that mean? What do you do in a day? And it's having those, people like love talking about themselves and their jobs, getting to understand them. And to your point, it's the connections you get to get the job are usually it's not the first person typically you call. It's that person connection to somebody else, and your name gets in play and your resume gets shared. That's really that's the power of the network, right? Is that, you're connected to someone else, 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? Somehow we're connected somewhere to the right person, but you have to take that first step to start talking to people in a very conversational way, not asking for something except for learning about people and getting to know them. And if you do that, I think, are genuine about that, good things happen, right? You kind of have to make that positive momentum and kind of start the process and just kind of get things going. But if you do it, the momentum will pick up, and things will happen for you if you take that, take that first step to get out there and put yourself out there a little bit. Just talk to people, and people like talking about themselves. At the end of the day, that's what I truly have found. And I think it's also a good point about, willing to understand that you don't know everything when you get to a new job, and being willing to listen and being willing to learn. And I do think that in the military in particular, you didn't come into the military knowing how to be a corpsman, but you proved you could learn. At one point in time, you had to get trained up. And that ability to learn a new skill set is something that I think companies maybe don't appreciate that military folks have as well. Everyone that came to the military wasn't trained to do what they were doing in the military. They've learned a brand new job pretty quickly. In a matter of months, you learn to be a mechanic or learn to be, in some, strange field the military has that you never had a background in. If you've proven that once before, you can do it again. And again, that's something that maybe sometimes veterans don't talk about much about. Yeah, I can learn whatever you need to learn. I'll be able to do it. I've done it before. I can do it again.
Yeah, that makes me think of process. Sometimes we are so hung up on the outcome, whether it's getting the job or getting the connection, but it's the process that is really important. And when you think about in our military career, all of our training was accelerated. Everything was accelerated, and we did a great job. Even if you go to college while you're on active duty, which I did, those courses were accelerated. They were 8-week semesters, not 16. And was I a subject matter expert in the degree field? No, but neither is a campus graduate. And there's some differences too, and with the campus, traditional campus hires, and then the student veteran too. And I see this with a hiring manager I'm working with. The campus hires will seem to relay more knowledge about what they're learning, but they've had internships. Our student veterans or veterans who went to college while they were active duty, they didn't have the luxury of the internship. So they're doing everything they can to give themselves that leverage, but they need the training. And yeah, I think when we look at someone's military career, and not everybody, but mine, for example, like I said, I did something different every tour. It shows that I can learn and I can grasp and I can pivot. And I think that any growing organization would benefit from hiring someone who has that mindset, who can pivot, who can change, who can implement. And there's plenty of veterans who are like, hey, I just want a job. I don't want to be in leadership. I just want to go to work. I'm done with that, or I'm not interested in this. And that's perfectly fine. And there are roles and opportunities for those veterans. But a lot of us still have that hunger to implement, to lead, to look for different ways that we can improve a process, to always be thinking about how can this be better. And so, yeah, we need organizations and more people like what you do and what I do, and what 50 Strong does, and what all of these different industry leaders do at great organizations where they have an intention to hire veterans. We need more visibility around them because not every veteran knows that it exists when they leave.
No, 100%. And I think you're spot on with that. And I'd love to talk a little more too about, I mean, you have a unique, I think, perspective in some ways as a veteran and a military spouse. You've kind of seen that world from both lenses, and now being at Oracle and running the military programs there. I mean, you got there. What was the program like? I mean, did you start from scratch, or kind of maybe talk a little bit about when you got there and kind of what you've built and what you're doing with it?
Yeah, okay, that's good. One thing that I've really enjoyed at Oracle is I'm given a lot of autonomy and a lot of flexibility, and trust. So I appreciate that. When I joined Oracle, I was part of the recruiting team. I still am in recruiting programs. And when I moved into this position over 3 years ago, Oracle was in the middle of their very first SkillBridge cohort. It was their pilot. I think we had 4 fellows. It was one line of business. And since then, this next year, we're forecasting 60 fellows across 3 to 4 lines of businesses. And so that's grown tremendously program wise and bringing in SkillBridge fellows. But just within the fellowship, I've had the opportunity to really implement a lot of changes. And then with great hiring managers, you have to have good partnership in your organization. You have to have a great partnership with the hiring managers, the recruiting leaders. And I have that, thank God, and our military ERG. And so some things that we did were we played around, ran a pilot to see, do we want to run independently? We did get approved to run independently, but what we found is we liked working with Hire No Heroes because we found that candidates were more likely to get approved by their command to do SkillBridge with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce organization than some company they may not have ever heard of. But we also have a really great model that I stand firm in, is that if a hiring manager wants to participate in SkillBridge, they have to have the headcount to move them into afterwards. So we don't offer a fellowship unless there's a full-time role at the end. So while it might not be, we're not just bringing in hundreds of fellows a year, I have a pulse on all of it. And I like that. And I want that to make sure that it's a great candidate experience for our fellows. And I think it is, because what we're seeing with one of our lines of businesses, Oracle National Security Region specifically, a lot of them are now referrals. Just that line of business alone has 0 attrition in over 3 years, 100% offer rate, excellent conversion rate. I mean, it's just going really, really well. And now we've got other teams coming in going, hey, we want to know more about that. Last year, Oracle Health came in and they brought in a physician and that healthcare administrative level. Now that's more like 1 or 2 a year, and it's through connections, right? We're not out recruiting someone at an executive level. But we've definitely grown that program. We also, I guess I shouldn't speak on things that are about to happen, but we're really close to implementing an entire new program to support our data center rollout, which is massive. And then just what I've learned is that there's a lot of coaching and training involved in this role. It's not just filling open requisitions. As a matter of fact, we don't fill open requisitions with SkillBridge fellows. We create requisitions for SkillBridge fellows, but there's a lot of coaching and training and bridging between internal key stakeholders and our candidates. And so that's what I'm finding, is there's a big gap there on all ends. And a lot of what I do revolves around that and creating ways to help each party understand the opportunity and the benefit.
Yeah, it's a funny thing too. I mean, I think I saw it certainly at Amazon as we built our program. I spent more of my time probably internally trying to, I'd say convince, but at least make other business lines aware of the programs, right? Because it's great that you're wanting to hire veterans and have an external facing presence and people know your name, Oracle or Amazon, people know the name, but, how do you get that internal buy-in? Because that's really the key, right? So the business lines have the money. They're the one that have the job. So, and I think to your point too, if you build it, they will come, right? If other business lines see success from one business, like, well, I want some of that too. How do I get some of that? So the word of mouth and using the VRG and using the veteran network and having those key advocates that can say, hey, yeah, we tried it out and we got these amazing hires and the attrition rate's lower and their performance rate is better. I mean, it makes it an easy sell, once you have some other folks that have proven it and shown the model works, it just kind of grows from there. So but it is, I mean, it's a never ending internal marketing system you have to have a successful program, right? Because again, people turn over, people leave the company. Your best person that was in this division leaves, like, I got to find somebody else. And how do you replace that? So again, I think people underestimate the amount of work it takes internally to socialize programs on the veteran side to get that buy-in. That's where the money come from. That's where the resources come from, right? If you don't have that, it's great that you say we love veterans. That's really nothing. That's not a program, right? That's an idea, and that's great. But are you putting your money? You're putting your resources behind it. Are you putting program managers and recruiters behind it that are dedicated to it? 24/7. Again, it's if somebody says we want to hire veterans and it's a 10% of somebody's job, that's not a program, right? So how do you really get that buy-in and commitment is a lot of internal work to make that happen.
It is. I mean, you know it because you did it. You're right. Without the demand, who cares what you're supplying, right? The demand has to be there and they have to want to allocate some of that to veteran hiring. And what I'm finding though is as soon as you work with a hiring leader and they experience working with someone who's helping them facilitate that hire, because our recruiters are fabulous, but they're not all veterans. They don't understand the profile and they're churning and burning and they don't have time to look at resumes that don't make sense. They're looking at resumes that make sense, that meet the mark, and they're working to fill those requisitions. But when you're working with a recruiter and a hiring manager and you're helping them understand and you're getting them emotionally involved, because this cannot be transactional, not if you want an ongoing partnership. It needs to be deeper than I can fill your requisitions, and it needs to be deeper than I can give you a good candidate. Here's the why. And once they work with you and they hire, whether it's 2 or 4 or 6 people, I have not found one hiring leader that said, wow, that was a shit show. Don't want to work with you again. They all want it. And they want it because we're doing a good job of bringing them the right candidates. And Beau, a lot of the time, the right candidates they're not presenting themselves as the right candidates. They're not presenting themselves as top talent. I can look at a resume any week and go, it's not a good resume, but I can see what this person's done and I know they've done more and I know they can explain it better and I know they can elaborate. That is then where you go, hey, I want to work with you, but here's what you need to do. And you coach them very quickly. I don't have time I don't have time for one-on-ones necessarily or coaching, but if I'm going to talk to a candidate or I'm in an event and I'm talking to a group of people, we need to get right to the point, cut to the chase and go, here's what you need to do for me to want to advocate for you and pass your resume forward,
100%. I mean, again, it's again, that's the hard part, right? Is taking those skills that veterans have and turning them into and translating them into something that the hiring manager is going to understand. And I think that's one of the challenges we always face because the skills are there. They can do the job. It's not about doing the job. It's about how do you translate that and make it understandable for a non-veteran to appreciate the skills that that veteran can bring to the table. And once they get there, they usually blow their socks off, once they actually get into the role. But it is a little bit sometimes, the first one's the hardest one. But that's what you find. Once you get one person in, one becomes two and two become four. And then all of a sudden, it just builds that positive momentum, which is amazing. And again, and great to see what you've, built there at Oracle, which you continue to build. I guess, what would you highlight as successes of your program of what you've been able to do and how you've been able to build it, or things that you would talk about for others out there that want to get in there and build a program? I mean, what's the key to success that you think from the program you have at Oracle?
Well, when I came into this role, my predecessor, who was awesome and worked with the hiring manager and even launched the first Skillbridge Fellowship, he took another role. And so there wasn't a long turnover. And there was a lot of, okay, let me triage, see where we're at. What do we have? What resources do I have? There was a lot of that in learning, Beau, because I had never done this job before at another company. So I think just with any position or any, if I were talking to someone who said, hey, my company wants to start hiring, military candidates and invest in the veteran candidate, I'd like to start something. Where do I start? And I would say always start with, triage. See where you're at right now and then prioritize. But you've got to know where your starting point is. Do I have money or don't I have money? Do I have resource? Do I have a team or don't I have a team? And also understanding that it's a group effort. Like we just mentioned, you have to have at least a hiring manager on board to start this. You need to have, employer branding to help you. You need to have hopefully a leader who says, okay, you've got it. I'm excited to see what you come up with to give you that flexibility. And then lean on other people. Beau, I've reached out to, Tiffany at J&J, Matt Disher at Cushman and Wakefield, Jess at John Deere, Candy at 50 Strong. And I just thought, of course they're going to want to help me. Because if they're in this industry, then I hope it's for the right reason and they're going to talk with me. And so leaning on external people, other veterans, other people doing the same job, and just exploring, which, I created this process to finding your right career after leaving the military, and I changed the words to explore, engage, and launch. But it's kind of the same thing for this job and getting into the veteran recruiting spaces. First, you're exploring. You've got to find out what are some opportunities, what do you have to support it, and then you launch something. And everything's a pilot in the beginning. I also think that working with an external organization is really important. Hire Heroes was really beneficial for us to launch Skillbridge. We didn't have to work through the red tape. We didn't have to be independently approved. And they bring in great candidates. Working with Opline, an actual tool, which is funny because before I even knew of Opline I think I wanted to make a LinkedIn post to veterans and military spouses on how do you translate your skills? And I Googled military skills translator or best military skills translator tool. And it actually led me to Amazon's website. And I thought, oh, this is cool. I'm going to do it. I'm going to play with it. And my leadership was like, Mindy, Amazon? And I said, no, I was just experimenting. I didn't know it was offline, right? I'm just on Amazon's page. I'm filling it out. And all of a sudden, these jobs appear based on my input. And I found that really valuable because it's the first tool that I used that wasn't just okay, if you were, a gunner's mate, you can do this. Or if you were an electrician's mate, you can do this. It was, no, what have you been doing since you left? Do you have a degree? How long has it been since you've left? So using external organizations as much as possible is really important because you can't do it all. I'm great at talking. I think I have a good skill at making people feel comfortable and welcomed. I'm really honest and forthcoming. It doesn't mean that I know everything else or that I will ever be good at everything else. So I need partnership, I need help, I need resources. But you asked, what are some of the other achievements besides expanding, Skillbridge massively from 4 to 60 people, in a matter of 3 years, across different lines of businesses. I also didn't have any formal partnerships, and I've been operating on a very modest budget, if you will. And so just this year, we've been able to partner with you, Opline. We've been able to partner with 50 Strong, and we're moving into a formal partnership with Hiring Heroes. So, that's another piece of getting your internal stakeholders bought into understanding that you can hire a great recruiter and you can hire a great program manager and you can hire a great veteran. You can do that. That's not the end. And you can make the dinner, but you need a plate to serve on, I mean, you need the pieces. And so leaning on people, and I'm always a resource if anyone ever, came to me and said, Mindy, I'm with such and such company and I'd like to do that. I'm going to invest in them right away and give them everything I know, tell them everything I know. I'll share decks. I'll share processes. I'll share anything I can that can help them get something started. And then understanding that we need external organizations that have a focus on different areas of the whole recruiting pie with military. And then, working with your internal stakeholders, helping them understand that there is a need and you have to have a certain amount of resources, at least at the bare minimum, flexibility to implement something. If you have no money and you have no team, you need at least the flexibility to be creative and start something. And you just start. That's it. And you see how it goes. and you keep improving as you go.
Yeah, no, I think it's one of the beauties of being in the veteran hiring space is that not one company can hire all the veterans, right? I think we are very good about sharing best practices, what's worked for you or not worked, and trying to make sure everyone succeeds because there's room for everybody out there, and there are so many folks that are willing to give back and so many organizations. I mean, yeah, hiring our heroes and Hire Heroes USA and Candy and what she's built at 50 Strong is amazing. And just, you reach out to folks in the industry if they're committed to it, they're going to make the time to help you out because again, there's two more veterans out there that need jobs, and if every company had a program that was up and running, it's a good thing, right? I mean, there's enough talent to go around. So again, I think that's part of the beauty and the fun of being in this community is the sense of camaraderie we have, wanting to see other programs succeed. Fighting each other. It's like there's enough talent to go around. Just be good actors. If you help somebody else out, it will come back to you in spades, and your program will continue to grow, and you'll get the word out there. And the veterans talk, and the military spouses talk. They know what's who's legitimate and who's really committed to it and who's invested in it. And I think another point you make that's super important is when you are building your program, you have to solve a problem the company has, right? I think that's what I always trying to look at. Okay, what did Amazon? Where are their pain points? If I can find a solution for a pain point that Amazon has, well, they're going to give you resources, right? If I'm just putting something out there because it's fun and nice and great, but they don't need it, then why are they going to fund that? But if you say, hey, I can find you more data center technicians, I can find you more cleared people to come work at AWS, well, that's money. That's, it really, at the end of the day, it does come down to the ROI and bottom line. So you do have to find that connection to what does the company care about? How do I build a solution that is a veteran tailored solution to help fix a company problem? When you can bring that together, that's when you really see things take off.
It's yes. I actually bypassed that whole piece of what are the needs of the company. Obviously, there's the needs of the company, but something that is interesting, especially in the last few months, is people have been concerned about what used to be called diversity recruiting or inclusive recruiting. And for Oracle, we're a government contractor, and there's that benchmark to hire a certain amount of protected veterans, and it's important not just to meet the metric, but it's important because if the government is our client, how are we also supporting that client? And so that is helpful to have a number. It's helpful to have a metric, or it's helpful to know, well, what is your demand? At least know what's your demand and how can I support that and bring you a good candidate, not just because they can do the job, but they're going to help really reflect what our society looks like. And also having different people on your team does create, a booming workforce, a lucrative workforce. You do need different types of people. You can't hire everyone from your alma mater, or you can't hire everyone, from where you grew up. And so, but you do need that starting point. You do need to know, what does the company need right now? And then what do I believe in? I go back to the relational and emotional part of it is, let's actually put some skin in the game. You're going to get a better product, at least out of me, if I can find out what your needs are, but also bring what I believe is really important, bring that together, and then you've got a really good outcome.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that hits it the nail on the head. So how do you bring those two things together and make it and show it to the company what you're providing them? If you can get that, that's the sweet spot, and then you take off, and it just can grow like wildfire from there. So great stuff, man. Yeah, I love your passion. I love what you've done and how you've grown your program, and it is a pleasure to have you here today. Before we wrap up, any last thoughts or things that you're passionate about you want to share? What you're doing for our veterans, military spouses. Would love to kind of get your last take before we wrap up.
Oh my gosh. Well, thanks for having me, Beau. And thanks for all you guys are doing at Opline. You're definitely a fixture in the space. Like, I knew your name before I ever knew your face. And it's funny because you're a Marine. I'm like, wow, he's the friendliest Marine I've ever met. I think that the most important, important thing I want to leave off with is that conversation is really important. Why you're podcasting is to ignite conversation. And the conversation is part of your networking. The conversation is part of getting to know people. And actually, in the internal conversation, that I want more veterans to focus on the pre-gaming, not just the outcome of getting the job, but all the things that go into it and really start being open-minded to what might seem like fluff, but it's really important to explore, to take personal inventory, and really just understand the audience, because it can change between if we're talking to employers or if we're talking to candidates. And mostly just let's keep having conversations and moving away from transactional work, because the outcome will be there, but how we go into it and the input needs to be really personal and really unique and authentic.
I love it. I love it. Conversations are a key. It's networking, right? Your conversations are just and sharing, and just being willing to share and spend the time and and give back. I think that's the biggest thing. I always talk about send the elevator back down. We've got your program's in a great place. You've done some great stuff. How do we send that elevator back down and bring others up to help them get there? Have those conversations internally, externally, and keep being a great example. Well, hey, Mindy, it was truly a pleasure to talk to you today, to get to know you a little better. Thanks for sharing with the Opcast audience some of your tips, and look forward to seeing you out there on the veteran road sometime soon. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks again.
Thanks, Beau.